It was supposed to be a perfect weekend, a day to unwind, soak in the sun, and enjoy my pool. But that peaceful plan shattered the moment she walked into my yard. There she was, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, marching right up to my pool like she owned it. And what did she say? "You're not using this pool for your own pleasure anymore. It's for my party." I stared in disbelief. Was she serious? She was. She insisted that her HOA-approved party needed to use my private pool. No discussion. No negotiation. Just pure entitlement. Now, I've been through my fair share of HOA battles, but this was crossing a line. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I made a choice. I drained my own pool. And when Karen couldn't control the situation, what did she do? She called the cops. But what happened next will shock you. Stick around for the full story. You won't believe how it all unfolded. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. The sun was shining, the weather was perfect, and I couldn't wait to dive into the pool I'd worked so hard for. After a long and stressful week of work, this was my time to unwind. Just me, the cool water, and some much-needed peace. I had planned for a relaxing day, maybe even reading a book by the poolside or catching up on some music. It was supposed to be one of those rare, blissful moments when you could forget about everything else. But little did I know, a certain HOA member, let's call her Karen, had other plans. Karen wasn't your average neighbor. Oh no. She had a way of believing that she was somehow above everyone else. If there was an event to be organized, a rule to be enforced, or a voice to be heard in the neighborhood, she was front and center. The HOA? It was practically her personal kingdom. She would regularly march around, giving out unsolicited advice and checking up on everyone's property like some sort of self-appointed neighborhood police officer. On that fateful afternoon, Karen decided that my pool wasn't just mine, it belonged to the entire neighborhood. At least, in her mind. As I settled into my lounge chair, enjoying the solitude, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. I didn't think much of it until I saw her walking up my driveway, a stern look on her face, a clipboard in hand. She marched right up to the pool and without so much as a hello, she dropped the bomb. "This pool is no longer just yours," Karen announced, her voice dripping with authority. "It's going to be used for my party. The HOA has approved it, and you need to clear out." My jaw practically hit the floor. I blinked a few times, trying to process what I just heard. Did she just say I had to vacate my own pool for her party? A party that I wasn't invited to? I tried to stay calm, but the confusion and frustration started to build up. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "You want me to leave my pool, so you and your guests can use it?" Karen didn't back down. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. The HOA approved it, and you're expected to comply." She added, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. At that point, I couldn't believe what was happening. This woman had the audacity to come into my yard and tell me what to do with my own property. But that wasn't the worst part. It wasn't just about her demand, it was about how she acted like I had no say in the matter, as if her HOA approval was some kind of universal law. And that's when I realized I had to take control. No way was I letting her push me around in my own space. I stood frozen for a moment, processing the words that had just left her mouth. It was like something out of a bad sitcom. Was she really telling me that I needed to vacate my own pool for her party? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. This wasn't just some random request. It was an order, as though my property didn't belong to me anymore. Karen stood there, hands on her hips, looking at me with that infuriatingly smug expression on her face. Her clipboard, which she seemed to think gave her some sort of authority, was gripped tightly in one hand, and she just waited for my response, as though she had all the time in the world. "I'm serious," she said, her tone cold and authoritative. "This pool is going to be used for my party today. The HOA has approved it, and you're not allowed to swim here. I'm giving you 10 minutes to clear out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 10 minutes. I paid for this pool. It was installed and maintained with my hard-earned money. This was my property. No HOA rule, no Karen with a clipboard, could change that. The shock I felt quickly turned to frustration, and then to anger. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my frustration was leaking through, like a small crack in a dam that was about to burst. I paid for this pool, it's mine, I said, trying to keep my composure. But inside, I was fuming. You can't just come in here and tell me what to do with my property. Her eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, I thought she might back off. But no, Karen wasn't done. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. You don't understand, she snapped. The HOA approved it. This is a community event, and you need to respect that. I've already talked to the board, and they agreed that this is happening. She was relentless. The more she talked, the more entitled she sounded. It was as though she genuinely believed that the HOA gave her some divine right to take control of my private space, to walk into my home and dictate how I used it. The audacity of it all was mind-boggling. But what really got under my skin was the way she spoke, like I was the problem, like I was the one being unreasonable for not bowing to her demands. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't care what the HOA approved, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. This is my pool. I paid for it, and I'm not leaving. You can't just walk in here and take it for your party. Karen's eyes flashed with irritation, and I could see her bracing for the next round of this ridiculous confrontation. But the more I stood my ground, the more I realized this wasn't about the pool anymore. This wasn't about a community event. This was about power. It was about control. And she was determined to take control of something that wasn't hers, simply because she believed she could. It wasn't just a pool to me. It was the one place in my life where I could escape the stress, the noise, the world outside. It was my sanctuary. I spent hours designing it, choosing the right tiles, the perfect lighting, the ideal furniture. I didn't need her or anyone else invading that space. I didn't need her to come in and tell me how to enjoy what I had worked so hard for. This is insane, I muttered under my breath, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of it. I don't care about your HOA event. You're not taking over my pool. Not today, not ever. Karen wasn't backing down, and the more she talked, the more she convinced herself that she was in the right. You're being unreasonable, she said, a smug smile creeping across her face. If you don't clear out, I'll have to escalate this. And trust me, you don't want the board to get involved. My heart raced. This was getting out of hand. I was now at a crossroads. Either I let her have her way, let her walk all over me and my property, or I stood up for myself. No way was I going to let Karen and the HOA bully me into submission. The thought of them controlling my life, my space, was too much to bear. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't just going to give in. I wasn't going to let this woman dictate what I could and couldn't do in my own backyard. If she wanted to take control so badly, I'd give her a reality check she'd never forget. I turned to face Karen, my resolve solidifying. If you want this pool so badly, fine, I said, my voice cold. But I'm not leaving. With that, I made my move. If she thought she could take over my sanctuary, I'd show her just how far I was willing to go to protect it. I stood there, watching Karen's smug expression grow as she waited for me to back down. She stood with that annoying clipboard clutched in her hand, arms crossed over her chest, as though she were the ruler of the neighborhood. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, thinking that I would cave in, that I would simply comply because, well, she was part of the HOA, and in her mind, that made her some kind of authority figure. But I couldn't back down. Not now. Not when I had worked so hard for this pool, this house, and this piece of paradise I had carved out for myself. I had poured time, money, and effort into making this my sanctuary. This wasn't just a pool to me, it was my escape, my retreat from the world outside. And now, here she was, trying to take that away from me as if it were hers for the taking. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. My heart was racing, my pulse quickening. Part of me still couldn't believe what was happening. This woman, a complete stranger to me, was demanding that I leave my own property so she could have a party. It felt like a nightmare, like something out of a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. But as I stood there, the weight of the situation began to settle in. I realized something that made everything crystal clear. I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her walk all over me and turn my life into her personal playground just because she had a clipboard and a sense of entitlement. If I let her take control now, where would it end? If I let her take my pool, what would she want next? No. I had worked too hard for this, and I wasn't about to let some Karen with a false sense of authority take it away from me. The decision had been made. I glanced at my pool. The water shimmered in the sunlight, the smooth surface reflecting the clear blue sky. Everything about it screamed mine. This was my space, and I wasn't about to give it up without a fight. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside of me. This wasn't just about the pool. It wasn't even just about Karen. It was about standing up for what was right, for protecting what was mine. I thought about how much I had sacrificed to get to this point in my life, how many late nights, how much hard work had gone into building my home, my oasis. And now, here was this woman trying to take it from me because she thought she had the power to do so. I turned to face Karen, my fists clenched by my sides. I didn't care that she was part of the HOA. I didn't care that she was trying to pull some kind of power play. I wasn't going to let her have control over me anymore. I took another deep breath, gathering every ounce of strength I had left. "You want this pool so badly, Karen?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, considering the storm that was brewing inside of me. "Fine. You can have it. But not in the way you think." Karen's eyes lit up, thinking she was about to win this battle. She opened her mouth, probably to gloat or give more demands, but I didn't give her the chance to speak. Without another word, I walked toward the pool equipment. I could see Karen's confusion as I approached the pool's drainage system. She wasn't sure what I was doing, but I didn't care. I didn't need her approval. I flipped the switch. The sound of water starting to drain was almost deafening in the silence that hung in the air. The pool began to empty slowly, the once sparkling water swirling down the drain in a slow, steady stream. I could feel the power shift in that moment, from her to me. I was taking back control. Karen's face went from smug certainty to pure shock in a matter of seconds. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes widened in disbelief. She didn't know how to react. "What the hell are you doing?" she finally managed to sputter, her voice rising in a mix of panic and anger. I didn't respond. I just watched as the water continued to drain, slowly but surely. Each passing second felt like a victory. Each gallon of water that disappeared felt like a strike against a sense of entitlement. Her voice grew more frantic. "Stop. You can't do this. I'll call the cops. You're ruining everything." But I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her intimidate me anymore. I had reached my breaking point, and now I was taking control in a way she never expected. "You want to take over my pool for your party?" I asked, my voice steady and unwavering. "Well, if you think you can just walk in here and take what's mine, you're sorely mistaken." As the last of the water began to disappear, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I wasn't just draining a pool, I was draining the power she had over me. I was showing her, and anyone else who might try to pull this kind of stunt, that I would not be bullied. Not now, not ever. Karen was furious, her face red with rage. But I stood my ground. Her next move was predictable. She whipped out her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed the number for the cops. I could hear her muttering angrily under her breath, ranting about how I had no right to do this and how she was going to make sure I paid for it. But I wasn't worried. I had done nothing wrong. I was simply protecting my own property, my space, my peace. As Karen ranted into the phone, I leaned back against the pool deck, crossing my arms over my chest. I knew I had made the right decision. I had stood up for myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt empowered. I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me anymore, not even the HOA Karen who thought she could control everything. I had drawn my line in the sand. And this time, I wasn't backing down. As the water continued to drain from my pool, I watched Karen's expression change from disbelief to pure shock. Her body stiffened as if she had just witnessed something unthinkable. For a moment, she stood there, frozen in place, as if trying to process what I was doing. The sound of the water swirling down the drain echoed louder with each passing second, and I could see her mind scrambling, trying to grasp what was happening. She had clearly not expected this, and she had no idea how to react. At first, I thought maybe she was just stunned, maybe she thought I was joking, or maybe she just couldn't believe someone would actually do what I was doing. But no, the look on her face quickly turned from disbelief to something far more furious. The more the pool emptied, the redder her face became. I could almost feel the steam coming out of her ears as her frustration began to boil over. "What are you doing? Stop it right now," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and trembling with anger. She took a few steps forward, as if she could somehow stop the process with her sheer presence alone. "You can't do this. You can't just drain your pool. This is outrageous." But I wasn't listening. I didn't need to listen. The feeling of taking back control was too powerful. She had thought that she could walk into my space and dictate how I should live, but she hadn't counted on the fact that I wouldn't let her. She hadn't counted on the fact that I would stand my ground, no matter how outlandish or extreme her demand was. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She started pacing back and forth now, muttering to herself, her face turning bright red with a mixture of fury and embarrassment. I could see her flustered, not knowing how to fix the situation she had caused. She was in over her head, and she knew it. "You're completely unreasonable," Karen yelled, spinning toward me. "I don't know what's wrong with you, but you can't do this. The HOA is going to hear about this. They'll sue you for this, and I'll make sure they do. This is destruction of property." I couldn't help but smirk at her. "You're right. It's my property. I can do whatever I want with it," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You can't just take over what's mine because you feel entitled to it." Karen seemed to falter for a second, her hands trembling in frustration. She was clearly trying to hold onto some semblance of control, but it was slipping away from her with every second that passed. She had underestimated me, and now, her only option was to escalate things. She was in full Karen mode now, desperate and flailing. And then, in true Karen fashion, she did what I should have expected. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. She didn't even bother to ask if I was okay with it. It was as if she had already made up her mind that this situation required an official intervention. A moment later, she was on the phone, her voice rising with urgency and drama. "Yes, I need the police. There's a crazy person draining their pool for no reason," she shouted into the phone, her voice carrying across the yard. "They're destroying property, and I need someone to come and arrest them. This is absurd. Someone needs to stop them before they do any more damage." The sound of her frantic ranting only amplified the absurdity of the situation. Here she was, calling the cops because I was draining my pool that I had every right to use as I saw fit. I shook my head in disbelief as I watched her turn the volume up on her drama. I couldn't believe this was happening. Karen wasn't even trying to reason with me anymore. She had already decided I was the villain in this story, and she was on a mission to make sure everyone knew it. But despite the ridiculousness of it all, I wasn't worried. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. This wasn't destruction of property. It wasn't some crime. I was simply taking a stand. This was my space, my property, and I had every right to use it as I saw fit. As she ranted into the phone, I continued to stand there, arms crossed, watching the pool drain. The water was now nearly gone, and the pool was nothing but a shallow, empty basin. The silence was almost deafening, the sound of the water trickling down the drain the only noise in the air. I had done what I needed to do. I had made my point. And now, Karen had made hers. She was willing to go to any lengths to assert her so-called authority over me. She was willing to make a scene, even if it meant dragging the cops into a situation that didn't even need them. A few minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a police car turning down the street. My stomach dropped, but I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt more in control. This wasn't my problem to fix, it was Karen's. The cops would see through her drama, just like I had. Karen's voice grew even louder as she saw the police car approach, as though trying to make sure they understood just how wrong I was. There they are, she practically yelled, pointing toward me like I was some kind of criminal. That's the one. That's the person who's been destroying property. I need you to do something about this. As the officers stepped out of their car and approached, I could see the confusion on their faces. They didn't know what to expect, but they could clearly sense that something wasn't right. They approached Karen first, who immediately launched into her version of events, her voice shaking with a mix of outrage and self-righteousness. She recounted the entire tale, embellishing details, no doubt, and portraying herself as the wronged party. But when they turned to me, I simply explained the situation, keeping my tone calm and reasonable. I paid for this pool, I said. I have every right to do what I want with it. She walked onto my property, demanded I leave, and when I refused, she started calling the shots. I just drained my pool because I'm not going to let her dictate what I do in my own backyard. One of the officers glanced over at the empty pool, then back at Karen. There was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He turned to Karen, raising an eyebrow. You called the cops because they drained their own pool. Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red, if that was even possible. She opened her mouth to argue, but the officer raised his hand, signaling for her to stop. We can't do anything about this. It's a property dispute. You can't just call the cops every time something doesn't go your way. Karen sputtered, clearly furious that her plan to call in the authorities hadn't worked. But the officer wasn't finished. You don't have a case here. If you feel wronged, you'll have to take this up with the HOA or go through legal channels. But there's nothing we can do about someone draining their own pool. Karen was speechless. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. The power she had once believed she held over the situation had completely evaporated. The officers turned and began walking away, but not before one of them shot me a quick, approving glance. The other officer, looking slightly embarrassed for Karen, simply shook his head as they got back into their patrol car. And just like that, Karen's power trip was over. The confrontation was over. She was left standing there, her arms flailing in frustration, and her plans in shambles. As the officers drove off, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph. The battle was over, and I had come out on top. Karen had learned a valuable lesson. You can't always get what you want just because you think you're entitled to it. But for me, this wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder that sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully is to take control, stand your ground, and never back down. I didn't just drain my pool, I drained the power that Karen thought she had over me. And in the end, that felt a whole lot better than any party she could have thrown. I could see the flashing blue and red lights before I even heard the sirens. They were a long way down the road, but the way they pierced through the quiet, sleepy afternoon made my stomach tighten. It wasn't the fear of the cops arriving that had me on edge, it was the realization that Karen had taken this thing to a whole new level. She'd dialed 911, calling in a scene so ridiculous that I almost felt embarrassed for her. But I knew I had done nothing wrong. I had every right to stand up for myself, for my space, and I wasn't about to let her intimidate me any longer. The sound of the sirens grew louder as the patrol car neared. By this point, Karen was practically frothing at the mouth. She was pacing around in circles, ranting about the destruction of property and how she'd make sure the HOA and the authorities were involved. She was so worked up that she hadn't even noticed the police car pull up into my driveway. The officers got out of their car, their faces serious but not exactly surprised. One of them was tall, with short-cropped hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, while the other was a bit younger, a more relaxed figure with an easy smile. I figured the younger one was probably still learning the ropes, but I could already tell that this wasn't going to be your usual call. I was already bracing myself for what would come next. But Karen? She was ready to launch into her performance, no doubt. She rushed over to the cops immediately, practically dragging them toward the pool area, her hands flying in exaggerated gestures as she began her tale of unlawful pool draining. "They're ruining everything," Karen practically screamed as she pointed toward me. "This person is destroying my property. They've drained their pool just to spite me. You have to do something." I stood there, arms folded, watching the spectacle unfold. I didn't even flinch. The officers exchanged a look, and I could tell they were already beginning to question the legitimacy of her claims. This wasn't a scene they dealt with every day, that much was clear. The younger officer, who I'll call Officer Collins, was the first to speak. He gave me a quick glance and then turned to Karen. You called 911 about someone draining their own pool?" he asked, his voice calm but with a hint of disbelief. I could see the flicker of frustration on Karen's face as she tried to explain herself. She was practically shaking, her voice growing louder with each word. "This is a community issue. They're breaking the rules. They're ruining the pool for my party. I told them to clear out, and when they wouldn't, they started draining it. I demand that you do something about this. This is criminal." The officer didn't seem convinced, and he turned back toward me. I just want to understand what happened here. Can you tell me your side of the story?" he asked. I took a breath, keeping my voice even. "Sure." I was enjoying my pool, minding my own business, when Karen here came over and told me I had to leave because she had a party planned. She said the HOA had approved it, and I had to vacate the pool. I told her no. This pool is mine. I paid for it. I have every right to use it as I see fit. Karen interrupted, as expected. "That's a lie. I never said that. I'm just asking for some consideration. This is an HOA-approved event, and you're being completely unreasonable." The officer raised a hand, signaling for her to stop talking. "I'm going to need you to let her finish," he said. I continued, unbothered by her outbursts. "So, I refused to leave. And then she made a scene, demanding that I get out. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to just hand over my property because someone thinks they can walk in and take control. I decided to drain the pool because if she wants to take over something that's mine, I'll take it back in my own way." The older officer, Officer Davis, raised an eyebrow. "You drained your own pool?" he asked, looking more perplexed than anything. I could sense a slight chuckle threatening to escape him, but he kept it professional. "Yes," I said, nodding. "It's my pool. If she thinks she can walk all over me, then I'll take control of the situation." Karen was fuming at this point. She huffed, her arms flailing in anger. "You can't do this. You can't just waste water and destroy everything. This is my neighborhood. This is an HOA-approved event, and I'll have you thrown in jail for destroying my property." The younger officer, Collins, looked at her with a bemused expression. Your property? It's her pool, and she has every right to do what she wants with it. Draining it may not have been the best solution, but from what I'm hearing, she wasn't doing anything illegal. I'm going to need you to calm down." Karen, of course, wasn't having it. She wasn't used to being told no, she wasn't used to people not caving to her demands, especially not when she thought she was in the right. "This is ridiculous. I'll make sure the HOA hears about this. I'll make sure you both lose your jobs. I won't let this go," she screamed. I could tell she was in full meltdown mode, but the officers weren't fazed by it. They had heard these kinds of tantrums before. Officer Collins looked over at me. "I understand you're frustrated, but it's important that we handle this calmly. The thing is, as it stands, there's nothing illegal about what you've done. You own the pool. You can drain it if you want. Karen's face twisted with fury, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. Well, if you're not going to do anything, I will, she snapped. I'll be calling the HOA right now, and you'll see just how wrong you are. She pulled out her phone once again, and the officers glanced at each other. Officer Collins sighed, clearly frustrated with the whole situation. This is not a police matter. You'll need to handle this with the HOA if you feel wronged. But from a legal standpoint, there's nothing that can be done. Karen didn't want to hear that. She wasn't ready to back down. You're all worthless, she shouted, throwing her arms up in the air. You're supposed to be helping me, but all you're doing is enabling this criminal behavior. At this point, the officers were growing weary of the drama. Officer Davis cleared his throat, his patience wearing thin. Listen, this is your final warning. I'm advising you to walk away. If you continue to escalate this, I'll have no choice but to write you up for wasting police resources. We don't have time for this kind of nonsense. I stood there, taking in the scene before me. Karen had reached a level of hysterics I hadn't thought possible. She was completely irrational, thinking that the whole world would bow to her demands simply because she was part of the HOA. But in that moment, I realized something. The power she had over me was completely gone. She could yell, scream, and call the cops all she wanted, but the officers weren't buying it. They had seen this kind of thing before. The officers exchanged one last glance before walking back toward their car. We're done here, Officer Collins said, his voice firm. We're going to head out, and we recommend you do the same. This is a personal matter between you and the homeowner, and it's not for us to settle. Karen's jaw clenched as she watched them drive away. She stood there for a few moments, seething with frustration. But there was nothing more she could do. The cops had sided with me, and there was no way to reverse that. I watched as she stormed off, muttering to herself about how she was going to report everyone involved. But I didn't care anymore. I had defended my space, my property, and I had stood my ground. The fight had been exhausting, but it was worth it. The cops were gone, and Karen's little power play had fallen apart. The water was almost completely gone from the pool now, and as I looked at the empty basin, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had taken back control of my own life, my own property, and no HOA Karen was going to take that away from me. As the day began to wind down, I leaned back in my lawn chair and exhaled deeply. It had been a wild ride, but in the end, I had won. And there was nothing Karen or anyone else could do about it. The chaos of the past few hours had finally come to an end. Karen, red-faced and defeated, had stormed off in frustration. She didn't get what she came for. The officers had sided with me. The water in my pool was nearly drained, and the evening had fallen into a tense, yet oddly peaceful, silence. As I stood there, looking at the now empty pool, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't the relief of someone who had just weathered a storm and barely escaped unscathed. No, it was the feeling of someone who had taken control of a situation that threatened to overpower them. It was the feeling of someone who had taken a stand for themselves, their property, and their peace. Karen had tried to take control of something that wasn't hers, my space, my pool, my peace, and in doing so, she had underestimated me. She thought her HOA title and her entitled attitude would give her the upper hand. She thought that because she had the power to make rules in our neighborhood, she could simply dictate how others should live. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let her, or anyone, walk all over me. The sense of empowerment I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had experienced in a long time. There was something incredibly liberating about standing up for yourself, especially when the stakes are high. I had fought for my space, and I had won. But it wasn't just about the pool. It wasn't about the drama or the absurdity of Karen's demands. It was about asserting my right to exist in peace, to live my life on my own terms, and to never let anyone dictate how I should live it. As I gazed at the empty pool, I reflected on what had led up to this moment. It wasn't just about one HOA Karen thinking she could control my property. It was about the larger issue of boundaries and respect. We live in a world where people, whether through authority, entitlement, or sheer force of will, often try to push their boundaries onto others. It happens all the time. From overbearing bosses to intrusive neighbors, people sometimes think they can infringe upon your life, your space, your rights. And sometimes, it's easy to let that happen. We want to avoid conflict. We don't want to make waves. But in doing so, we often forget the most important thing: our peace, our space, and our lives are ours to protect. Karen had no right to come into my yard and demand anything. But I was the one who allowed her to do so, at first. When she knocked on my door, demanding I leave my pool for her party, I could have backed down. I could have said, "Fine, whatever, just take it." But I didn't. I stood my ground. I realized that my peace and my boundaries mattered more than her entitlement. The moment I decided to drain my own pool was the moment I took control. It wasn't an act of petty revenge or childish defiance. It was an act of self-preservation. It was my way of showing Karen, and anyone else who might think they can trample on my rights, that I wasn't going to let them. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine without a fight. When the police arrived and Karen launched into her tirade, I stayed calm. I explained my side of the story without raising my voice. I didn't need to shout or argue. I simply needed to stand firm in my position. And when the officers confirmed that I was within my rights, Karen was left with nothing but her anger and a failed plan. The beauty of the situation wasn't just in the resolution, though. It wasn't just about the pool being mine again, or the cops siding with me. The true beauty of it all was in the realization that I had the power to stand up for myself. I had the power to protect my peace and my space, no matter how unreasonable or entitled someone else was being. I thought back to the countless times I had let things slide in the past, letting people walk all over me because I didn't want to rock the boat or cause trouble. I'd given up my peace before, whether it was in a work situation, with friends, or with family. I'd allowed people to overstep their boundaries because I didn't want to make waves. I'd allowed people like Karen to take what was mine, just to avoid conflict. But this time was different. This time, I took control of the situation. I didn't back down. I didn't let Karen or the HOA, or anyone, dictate how I should live my life. And in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my space, but I had also reclaimed my sense of self-worth. As I stood there, watching the last of the water drain from the pool, I realized that the lesson I had learned was one that extended far beyond this incident. It was a lesson about boundaries, self-respect, and empowerment. It was a reminder that no matter how small or insignificant a situation might seem, our boundaries are important. Our peace is important. And no one has the right to take that from us. The incident with Karen was just a microcosm of the larger struggle many of us face in life. We're constantly being told what we should do, how we should behave, and what we should accept. From societal norms to workplace expectations to the opinions of others, there's always someone trying to impose their will on us. And often, it's easy to just go along with it. It's easy to give in and let people take what they want. But the truth is, doing so only robs us of our peace and our autonomy. As I stood there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let anyone walk over me again. I wasn't going to let anyone take my space, my peace, or my boundaries without a fight. And that, I realized, was the most empowering thing I could do for myself. I also realized that the key to protecting my peace wasn't just about standing up to others. It was about knowing when to set boundaries in the first place. The reason Karen's demands had even escalated to this point was because I had allowed her to believe she had the right to dictate what happened in my yard. I had given her the space to make that demand. But once I set a firm boundary and took control, everything shifted. The situation diffused itself. The cops saw that I was in the right, and Karen had no recourse but to retreat in defeat. Boundaries, I learned, are not just about defending your physical space, they're about protecting your mental and emotional space as well. When you let others overstep your boundaries, you're allowing them to invade your personal peace. And that's something that can never be taken lightly. It's easy to think that setting boundaries is selfish or confrontational, but the truth is, it's one of the most self-respecting things you can do. It's a way of saying, I value myself, and I won't let anyone trample over me. It's about standing up for your right to exist in peace, without fear of being bulldozed by someone else's will. In the end, Karen learned a hard lesson. She learned that entitlement doesn't give you the right to take what isn't yours. She learned that just because you can call the shots in the HOA doesn't mean you can walk all over your neighbors. And most importantly, she learned that there are people in this world who will stand up for themselves, no matter what. But the most important lesson wasn't just for Karen. It was for me. I had learned that I had the power to take control of my own life. That I didn't have to let anyone, no matter how loud, how entitled, or how demanding, take my peace from me. So, to everyone out there who has ever been in a situation where someone tried to trample on your boundaries, take heart. Stand your ground. Protect your space. And know that, in the end, when you stand firm in your rights, you will always come out on top. The pool was empty, but in that moment, I felt fuller than I had in a long time. Fuller of self-respect. Fuller of peace. And most importantly, fuller of the understanding that I would never let anyone take those things from me again. And that, I realized, was the true victory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over my backyard, I stood there, still reflecting on the wild turn of events that had unfolded in just a few short hours. What started as a relaxing day by the pool turned into a confrontation with Karen, a self-appointed HOA enforcer, and it ended with me taking control of my own space, my own property, and my peace. It wasn't just about the pool anymore. It wasn't even about the absurdity of the situation. It was about standing my ground when someone tried to take something that didn't belong to them. It was about asserting my right to live my life without anyone trying to impose their will on me. It was about reclaiming my space, both physically and emotionally. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where someone thought they could walk all over you, where they believed their title or position gave them the right to dictate your life, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe it wasn't a pool. Maybe it was something else, your time, your energy, your boundaries. But we've all faced people who think they can just step in and take control. And sometimes, it feels impossible to stand up to them. But here's the thing. You have the power to protect yourself and your peace. That's what I learned through this whole ordeal. The moment I decided to stop letting Karen take over my space and started asserting my boundaries, everything changed. I was no longer the victim of her demands. I was the one in control, and that shift was not just empowering, it was life-changing. And if you've had your own battles with entitled individuals like Karen, whether in an HOA or anywhere else, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your story with us. What happened? How did you stand up for yourself? Did you have a similar moment where you reclaimed your peace? Let's start a conversation and support each other in standing our ground. This channel, HOA Nightmares, is all about sharing the wildest, most frustrating, and sometimes hilarious stories about life with an HOA. We all know that dealing with these neighborhood organizations can sometimes feel like navigating a minefield of rules, regulations, and Karen-like personalities. So, if you've got a story that will make us laugh, cringe, or maybe even shake our heads in disbelief, we want to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to hit that button. You don't want to miss out on more crazy HOA stories, tips on dealing with difficult neighbors, and even a little bit of cathartic laughter. We're all in this together, and I promise, there's a lot more to come. So, what's next for me? Well, I'm going to continue living my life on my terms, just like all of you should. No more letting anyone push me around. No more giving in to entitled individuals who think they can take control. And, of course, I'll be right here, sharing more of these incredible stories with all of you. Remember, when someone tries to take your peace, your space, or your boundaries, take it back. Stand firm, because at the end of the day, you're the one who's in control of your own life. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, Be sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell icon for more HOA nightmares. We've got plenty more wild stories coming your way. Until next time, keep your space your own, and don't let anyone take it from you.